Hello, wonderful ballet teachers. Today, let's talk about musicality in ballet class. Musicality is an important part of the artistry of our classes, of our dancers' performances, of the way they interpret choreography, of the art form in general. Musicality is a big part of artistry in ballet. The simplest way that I have to define what musicality is to say that it's the way a dancer relates to their music, or their spoken word, or their soundscape, whatever. There are kind of two branches that a conversation on musicality can take. So the one side of it is a dancer can respond to music in a structural, almost mathematical way. So this would include like rhythm and meter and tempo. The other side of it is how a dancer is reacting to music emotionally. We're going to talk about that one last because it is more complex. So let's start with how we can explore musicality through the structure. With our most beginning dancers, not teen and adult beginners, but with like our itty bitty teeny tinies, we very often play freeze dance. It's fun, the kids like it, it's a reward, it's great. Freeze dance actually is a really great introduction to musicality because you are teaching the dancers that the music and the dancing are linked. It seems like I wouldn't need to mention listening to music while we're talking about musicality, but we've all experienced, we're getting close to a performance, the students know their choreography really, really well, and they start rushing. They're not listening to their music anymore. They have disconnected the dance from the music. One approach to help rejoin the music and the movement is to use a different version of the song. So I use the YAGP music library a lot for this if I'm working with variations. They have like 6 versions of the same variation. I'll use different versions of the song so that the dancer has to listen to their music. It's going to be different. I think it's a great challenge and it's a great reminder to dancers that, oh yes, I need to be actively listening, even though I've done this 100 times. When you look at music textbooks, one of the elements they always talk about is rhythm. Rhythm is a really great thing to start with. First of all, you need a downbeat. People need to be able to find the downbeat. That is the first task. If you can't find the downbeat, you can't accurately count your music. Just because you're saying numbers doesn't mean those are the counts. Counts correlate exactly with the musical score as written. So if you can't reliably find the downbeat and you try to count music, you are just saying numbers, which is really funny to watch. It's funny to watch until you have to clean it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh. So the first step in rhythm or meter is making sure you can find the downbeat. This is harder for some people than for others. So rhythm games, lots of rhythm games, lots of toys. People tend to think of props as just for the baby classes, but as long as you're not treating your students like babies, older students usually are pretty game for playing with the props as well. So shaker eggs and tambourines. Rhythm games are a great foundational step in helping people understand music. And when you understand music, you are better able to respond to it and link your movement with it. Going back to the idea of freeze dance as a great teaching tool, there's a ballet accompanist named Rob Thaler, I don't know. They have several albums. One of theirs that I particularly like is called Music for the Young Ballet Class. And one of the reasons I really, really like it is because there's a lot of improvisational songs, like tracks at the end. One of the improvisational tracks includes changes in tempo. So it'll go from fast to slow to fast to slow. One of the improvisational tracks includes changing meter. So it alternates between a 3/4 and a 4/4. And then there's another one on the same album that alternates between staccato and legato, which is great because then you can layer, like we're doing musicality, but you can also layer in qualities of movement, which is really cool. Meter is how many like little counts are in between the heavy counts. So like a 4/4 is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And a 3/4 is going to go 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3. I personally have a hard time hearing the difference between a 2/4 and a 4/4, but since they're both multiples of 2, you can call it a double meter. 3/4 and 6/8 are both triple meters. The 6/8 is a little easier for me to hear, but the bottom line is that most pieces of music for a ballet class are either a double meter or a triple meter. So when your students can reliably find the downbeat, then you can start helping them identify what kind of meter they're working with. When they can reliably do that, I really enjoy giving them a combination and then doing it several times to different meters of music. So we'll do it to a 2/4, and then we'll do it to a 3/4, and then we'll do it to a 4/4. I have one track on one album that is a 9/8, and wow, I don't use it because I don't know how to use 9/8s. If you know how to use a 9/8, let me know. I would love to learn from you. So we do the same combination to different meters. The steps haven't changed, but the way you time them and where you slow down and how you slow down, that changes. A pirouette combination to a march is really, really different from a pirouette combination to a waltz. And if that made you cringe because you're like, you should never mix the two, great, congratulations. You have a really deep intuitive understanding of how the two differ, but your students might not. So make sure you give them the chance to feel the difference. Another musical term that you'll find in textbooks is timbre or timbre, depending on how intimidating you want to be with your pronunciation. So I'm gonna go with just 7-Eleven style pronunciation on this one, and if that bothers you, whoops. Timbre is the unique sound of an instrument. So for example, a clarinet might play an A, and then a violin will play the same A, but it sounds different. You can hear the difference between a clarinet and a violin. Some people can hear the difference between a violin and a cello. Some people have a harder time, but usually people can distinguish between a stringed instrument and a brass or woodwind. Being able to identify different instruments in your score is so helpful when the timing and the counting gets tricky. For example, Tchaikovsky switches time signatures. Snow Scene is a great example. Have you ever sat down to count out Snow Scene? It switches between a double and a triple meter, which means at some point your numbers are wrong unless you drop a count or add a count somewhere. A lot of composers do this. Sometimes it's easy to hear the difference, and sometimes you're just like, I am lost. But if you can hear an instrument, if you're like, okay, this happens on the trumpet, it gives you an internal landmark to reset. Speaking of Tchaikovsky, he wrote a piece, you're probably familiar with it, you probably heard it in elementary school, but his Peter and the Wolf is great for introducing this concept to young kids because each character in the story is played by a different instrument. It's a really cool way to introduce kids to this idea that different instruments bring different qualities to the music. Those are a few of the structural elements in music that you will find in textbooks. Let's take a little bit of a shift now and talk about the emotional connection to music. On the one hand, it's a pretty natural human reaction to feel an emotional connection to music, but it's not universal. Not everyone feels that. Everybody connects with music a different way. I'm a big fan of incorporating activities that will help students first recognize that they are attaching an emotion to a piece of music, and then help them express that emotion in a way that is clearer to their audience. But every time we do these types of exercises or explorations, you do need to remember that not everybody connects the two, especially students on, for example, the autism spectrum. Some of them do connect emotion with music and some of them don't. So they will need a little more support. And then there are also students who are just private and they don't want to tell you how they feel. And that's okay too. We can explore emotion and musicality as a group without singling anybody out as like problematic. So when I start introducing the concept of emotion and music together, I start with the kids just listening to a song. I just want them to listen to it. And then I ask them to describe the music to me. And I'll write it down. Chalkboard, whiteboard, dry erase marker on the mirror, whatever. But write it out where everyone can see it and refer back to it. And the descriptive words are often emotions, but also it's like 50-50. Like half of them are emotions and half of them are not. We just want to describe it. The next layer is to say, okay, I love that you have come up with these descriptive words over here. I want to look more at some of these feelings. We've come up with more than one emotion for the same piece of music. And that's a really cool thing. Like we all have different reactions. Are there any other feelings that you think fit this music? I remember I was doing this activity for the class and I think I was using like one of Albinoni's adagios. And one of the kids was like, I feel very sad. And another kid was like, oh, I feel really happy. I think it sounds like an ice cream truck. Okay, first of all, if an ice cream truck drove through my neighborhood playing Albinoni, I would buy ice cream from them. I don't know where she lives, but that's the coolest ice cream truck ever. But that's an example of how different people have different reactions. Once you have a list of different emotions that people have suggested go with the music, then we're ready for the next step in this exploration process. If everybody is picking variations on a theme, like happy, pleasant, cheerful, if everybody is kind of sticking to what they feel like is safe, it's your job to toss out a new idea. Just so that, like, whether you think it fit or not is kind of less important. Generally, I'm a fan of honesty in teaching, but the point here is to show that we can interpret music different ways. And it is important that you have these descriptive emotions listed where everyone can see them. Because the next thing that I like to do is let the kids improvise movement to the music with a focus on showing the emotion that they think fits best. And like I mentioned, there are some kids who want to keep their emotions to themselves, or there are some kids who just don't link the two. Having a reference of like validated options really helps those kids. It helps them feel safer without pushing them out of what feels authentic to them. And then if we have time, sometimes I will continue improvising with the kids. Like I'll be like, okay, that was really cool. Is there another emotion that you would like to try? Or I will say, that looked amazing. You guys were all really into that. Let's add a challenge. What is the opposite of the emotion you were just working with? Can you show me that with this music? It's not going to look as good because it's not going to feel as good to them. And that's a cool experience too. And then you get to point out to the kids, how did that feel? And let them describe it first. And then you can validate and be like, I saw that it didn't come as easily to you, which reinforces the idea that they are successful in expressing their artistry, which is so cool. That's like one of my favorite things to do. So there's tons of things that I didn't cover here, but in this video, we did talk about rhythm, we talked about meter, we talked about quality of movement with staccato and legato, and that can go all kinds of places. We talked about timbre, we talked about emotion and its connection to music. That's 5 different ways to explore musicality in dance. That could get you through a whole summer session where you get to focus just on this one element of artistry. If you are interested in other elements of artistry, I have listed a few on my website, geekyballerina.com, and I've given brief descriptions of them there. These are things that I'm constantly creating resources about: blog posts, newsletters, videos. You also can sign up for my monthly newsletter on my website. I talk about an element of artistry each month. I hope you take some time to explore musicality in your classes. I hope you have a really great class.